Let me ask you this question, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, and I need you to tell the truth. You don't want to lie. It's not raining outside, but you might be struck by lightning if you lie about this, so fair warning. I'm in this category, so you're not going to be alone raising your hand. I'm just curious if you're my people. How many of you are like me, and that patience is not a virtue of yours? Let me see. Keep them up. Wow. You bunch of sinners. Awesome. Okay, good. I'm in that category as well. Now, let me ask you this next question. And again, by a show of hands, how many of you, when you're at the grocery store in the express checkout line, you count the groceries of the person in front of you, just by a show of hands? Oh, yes. Now, has anyone been brazen enough to call that person? Have you ever called a person out? Anybody, just by a show of hands? Okay, one. Did it go well? Did they let me take out 3 gallons of milk? I don't know what you do. Okay. I've never called anybody out. I like to think I walk by the Spirit and just kind of judge silently, but you call them out, whatever. Because I'm like, it's 15 items. You've got 16. This is no longer an express line. You have turned it into just a line, and now I'm frustrated. And so patience is not a big virtue of mine. It's obviously not a big virtue of yours, and that's why we're here today. Now, we're talking about waiting, but I'm not talking about grocery lines. I'm not talking about lines at Disney, Atlanta traffic, airline delays. Those are things that's just life things that you have to deal with. You choose to fly, you choose to go to Disney, you chose to live in Atlanta, you go to the grocery store. Lines happen, and you got to be patient. You just got to wait for things to happen, and that's a whole nother topic for another day. But when I'm talking about waiting, I'm talking about waiting weeks, months, years, decades in life. Major life issues that you are waiting on, seasons of life that you're waiting to come, or you're waiting for that season to be over. Maybe it's a relationship that you're waiting to develop. Maybe you're trying to get pregnant and you're waiting on that. Maybe it's a job situation that you're waiting on. Maybe it's a prodigal son or daughter that you're waiting to return home. Or maybe it's a family member that has walked away from the faith and you're waiting and praying that they would come back to the faith. Maybe it's a job situation that you're waiting for your company to be bought out. You're waiting for retirement. You're waiting for an investment to happen. But you are waiting. And you've done everything possible and you're just waiting. Or maybe you're single. If you're single here today and you're just waiting for, that spouse to come along. Now, I was single, and I'm just going to tell you, if you are single, every married person gives you the exact same advice. Every time you talk about waiting, every married person will tell you, when you know, you just know, and it'll just magically happen. That is a lie if I have ever heard one. All right, don't believe that. I had to steal Brianna's email address off a Bible study list, all right? So you got to do something to make it happen. But hey, when you know, all right? But waiting, just going, I've been waiting, I've been single forever, or man, we're married, we just can't seem to get pregnant, or this job situation, I want it to change. If you find yourself in a season of waiting, you are in great company. There's a guy in the Old Testament, he was a king named King David. You may know him better, David and Goliath. He was familiar with waiting, and if you study his life, man, he just went through so many different seasons and periods of his life of waiting. If God promised him something and he had to wait, or he was on the run and waiting, or things in his life that, man, he knew what he was supposed to do, but it wasn't just yet. And it wasn't just hours or weeks. It was months, years, decades. And maybe that is you here today, that you're waiting on someone or something to change. And how do you respond to that life situation of waiting? If you got a Bible, grab it. Go to Psalm chapter 40. Psalm chapter 40. And this is a very personal insight of David's waiting. He writes this psalm, and he gets a really in-depth personal look at, his waiting and what God's doing in his life. Now, we don't know exactly when in David's life he wrote this. So we don't know if he was the shepherd. We don't know if he was the promised king, but on the run. We don't know if he was king. But it doesn't really matter, because the principles he lays out and just his emotions, the heart and soul that he bears, all of us can relate to. Psalm chapter 40, verse 1, and here's what he writes. He says, I waited patiently for the Lord to help me, and he turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire, and he set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. He's given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see what he has done and be amazed. They will put their trust in the Lord. Oh, the joys of those who trust in the Lord, who have no confidence in the proud or who worship idols. Oh, Lord my God, you have performed many wonders for us. Your plans for us are too numerous to list. You have no equal. If I try to recite all your wonderful deeds, I would never come to the end of them. And he bears his soul and goes, I waited patient for the Lord, and he heard me, and he lifted me out, and he set my feet on solid ground. He gave me a new song to sing. And he goes, my goodness, the plans that God has for me are too numerous to recite. And he goes through this whole season, this whole period of waiting, and sees God's plan unfold. And here's what I want you to grasp, and I hope that encourages you here today, that if you're in a season of waiting, I just want you to understand that God is working, and it's your job and my job to wait patiently. God's working, wait patiently. He's working in your life, in your relationships, in your marriage, with your family, in your finances. He is working. Even though you may not be able to visibly see it, he is working. And it's your job, it's my job, to wait patiently for God to do what he's going to do. And I share that with you because personally speaking, I find it a lot easier to wait patiently when I know that somebody is working to make the problem better. When I know that somebody is working on the problem, I just find it easier to wait patiently. So I want you to understand that while you're waiting, God is working behind the scenes, whether you see it or not. That he is working, that he is moving, that it's your job and my job to wait patiently. And when you know that somebody is working, I just find it personally easier to wait patiently. Yesterday morning, or Saturday morning, we were going to sleep in, and instead we woke up to our power being completely out in the house. Now, I don't know if you've ever woken up to your air conditioner not working. It's difficult to be a pastor in that moment, to wake up there. And so we wake up, the alarm clock's, off, and TV's not working, and it just power's out. And so it was like, oh my goodness, power's out. How long is this going to be out? And Bryn goes, I'll call the power company. So she calls the power company, punches in a little account number, and the electronic voice comes on and goes, hey, we know the power is out at your address. We're working on it. It should be up by around 10:02. And the message is over. So Bryn relays that message. Now, knowing that the power company knew that the power was out at my house and they were working on it, honestly, it was a lot easier to wait and to wait patiently. Now, it would have been so frustrating if we'd called the power company. They were going, hey, we know the power is out at your house. Good luck. We know the power is out at your house. What do you want us to do about it? No, we know the power is out at your house. We are working. Good. I can't fix it. I can't do the power lines up there, but somebody is working on it, so I can wait patiently. God is working in your life and on your behalf and in that situation that you're waiting on. You may not be able to see it visibly, but he is working, and it's your job and my job to wait patiently. But while we're waiting patiently, I just want to give you 3 phrases, 3 questions to ask yourself as you wait patiently. Phrase number one is this. Am I forcing this? Am I forcing this? One of my favorite preachers to listen to, his name is Chuck Swindoll. He's in his 80s, and he's been pastoring for 60 years. And he's just one of those pastors that when he speaks, he just oozes out wisdom when he speaks. He's hilarious, tells great stories, and I love the way he preaches. A few months ago, I found a podcast that he put out, and it was like the top 10 things he's learned in 60 years of ministry. Phenomenal podcast. I made a whole staff listen to it. And one of the things that he mentioned that he learned in 60 years of ministry is this idea of force versus flow. And I want to get his quote exactly right. He said this. He said, generally speaking, when God is in something, things flow. When he's not, you have to force it. Generally speaking, when God is in something, things flow. But when he's not, you have to force it. Now, here's what's interesting in David's Psalms. In between verse 1 and 2, verse 1 says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he turned to me, and he heard my cry. So your prayers do not go unheard. God always hears your prayers. Verse 2, he lifted me out of the pit of despair. So don't miss this, right? So in verse 1, God heard my cry. In verse 2, he lifted me out of the pit of despair. But don't miss this. David does not give us a time frame between verse 1 and verse 2. He doesn't say, he heard my cry, 3 months later, he lifted me out of the pit of despair. He heard my cry, 6 months later, he answered. It's, he heard my cry, gigantic question mark, and then he answered my prayer, and then he lifted me out of the pit of despair. And when it comes to our lives, we go, God, he heard my prayer, 2 weeks later, I got a job. He heard my prayer, 6 months later, we got engaged. He heard my prayer, 9 months later, we had a kid. He heard my prayer, the third quarter of the fiscal year, my company got bought out and I retired. He heard my prayer, my timeline happened, and God worked out, everything's good. But what happens when the thing that you're waiting on doesn't happen in your time frame? Like what happens when the months go by and the months turn into years and maybe the years turn into multiple years and those multiple years turn into decades? Like what happens then? What happens when you're waiting and you know he's heard it, but man, it has not delivered, he has not answered. Do you try to force it or do you allow the flow of God to work into your life? And obviously, since most of us in this room, patience is not a high virtue, I think I can speak for most everybody here, including myself, that, man, I like to force things. I give God a certain time period, but man, if God doesn't show up in that time period, I can make it work. I can force it. I can make this situation work. And when that happens, it's usually filled with anxiety, stress, worry, not the things that God wants for that situation to happen. But when it flows from God, man, there's joy, and there's a peace that passes all understanding, and there's hope. So the question I just would simply like to pose to you is that thing that you're waiting on, are you trying to force a situation, or are you allowing the flow of God to work in and through your life? Now, you are familiar, I assume, with the term square peg, round hole. If you are, just kind of nod your head, square peg, round hole. Okay, good. Square peg, round hole, okay? Square peg, round hole. Let me just demonstrate this for you right here. So let's let this right here, let this represent a whole situation in life that you are waiting on, okay? Get it? Whole situation. Thank you. I'll be here all weekend. God bless you guys. Have a great afternoon. Yep, no. Don't forget to tip your server. All right. I was really proud of that joke, too. So anyway, this whole situation. The rest of the sermon can be bad. That's awesome. Anyway, you got this whole situation working on. This is the situation. Let's let this represent you. Okay? Square peg, round hole. It won't fit. It won't work. It's not meant to be. It's not supposed to be. This isn't what God wants you to do. But you know what? Did you know that you can force a square peg into a round hole with a blunt force item? So a square peg can work, and so maybe this is you, and this is the situation, and so you just kind of like, I made it work. You're going, what in the world? And now you've got a splitting headache for many reasons. Boy, this joke just keeps going. Man, this is phenomenal. Yeah. And you're going, well, why is it so stressful? Why is it so painful? Because the square peg round, you're trying to force it rather than allowing the flow of God to work in and through your life. You're going, yeah, but he didn't show up in the 3 weeks that I gave him. He probably won't. Yeah, but I gave him 6 months. It didn't work out. God's timing is going to work out in God's timing. Verse 1, he heard me. Verse 2, he answered. There is no time frame, but that happens with the flow of God, not from the force of you. Am I trying to force it? Second question is this. How is God working in my life? How is God working in my life? Verse 2, David writes, he goes, he lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. And he's given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. David goes, I waited patiently before the Lord. I'm not trying to force it, God heard my prayer and he lifted me out, or he rescued me. He set my feet on solid ground. He reassured me, and he gave me a new song to sing, or he renewed me. And so as you're patiently waiting, how is God working in your life? Because what happens is we get so focused on the situation that is not happening that we miss how God is actually working. And so if you go, okay, I'm not going to force that, I'm allowing God to flow into my life. I'm in a season, I'm in a period of waiting, but I'm trusting that God is working. So Lord, open my eyes and let me see how you are working. Let me see those moments that you rescued me and you saved me from this situation and pointed me in this direction. God, speak those little things to me and reassure me that everything is going to be okay. And God, renew my mind, renew my spirit. And what's interesting is David said God gave him a new song to sing. And so sometimes in the waiting period, God might give you a new song or a new passion or a new desire or a new outcome than the one you were originally waiting on. And that is okay, because if it's of God, it's way better than you ever dreamed or imagined for the original situation. So as you're waiting, going, God, rescue me, and God, restore me, and God, renew me, be open to the fact that God might give you a new passion, desire, interest than the one you were originally waiting on, but God is working. And so how is he working? How is he working in your life and in your marriage and in your finances and in your business and in those things that you're waiting on, going, God, open my eyes, let me see the hand of God moving in and through my life. Our son David, who's 9, about to be 10 years old, when he was born there in San Antonio, Texas, and about 6 or 8 hours later, the pediatrician comes in like they do, check on David, and I just watched the facial expression of the pediatrician. He kind of looked and he goes, okay, we'll see David back here in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks later, Brianna takes David back to the pediatrician. Now, our pediatrician in San Antonio was the most brilliant doctor with the greatest bedside manner you could imagine. Just amazing with kids and parents. David is 2 weeks old. Brianna takes him back there, and he looks at me and goes, yeah, he goes, this is what I thought the day he was born. And at 2 weeks old, he was diagnosed with craniosynostosis, which means he did not have a soft spot in his skull. It was fused together, and his skull was growing front to back, and it wasn't a good thing. And he goes, when David turns 3 months old, he's going to have major skull surgery. They're going to have to take out a chunk of his skull and put him in a helmet and allow his skull to grow the way it's supposed to grow. 3 months. Now, I'm just here to tell you as a parent, that 3 months felt like 3 years. If you've ever had a kid in hospitals or surgery, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, it was just forever. 3 months felt like 3 years. But in those 3 months, man, God began to show up in Brianna's life and in my life in ways that we never really experienced before in those 3 months. See, he rescued us. Typically, we'd found out that craniosynostosis sometimes it's not diagnosed till the kid is 1 or 2 years old. And when that's that late, it's a way more severe surgery. Our doctor found it at 8 hours after David was born and diagnosed at 2 weeks. And so he rescued us and found it as quick as he possibly could. He reassured us with little things going on in our life. See, the skull surgery typically was a cut from ear to ear and a zigzag all the way across. They'd fold back the scalp and do reconstructive surgery, about 8 hours, and blood transfusions. Major surgery for a 3-month-old. After doing a lot of research, we found this doctor, Dr. Jimenez, had invented a surgery specifically for this procedure that was endoscopic. It was a 1-inch cut and a 1-inch cut, and it was less than an hour-long surgery, no blood transfusions. He had invented this surgery, world-renowned. People would fly from all over to have this surgery done. And out of all the places for him to operate, he worked at University Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, 20 minutes from our front door. It's a little moments like that. God's going, I've got you. If you'll just trust me. I love David more than you love him as parents. He rescued us. He reassured us. And then he renewed us. See, a few weeks before the surgery, I get a phone call out of the blue from a pastor from Nashville, Tennessee. His name is Blake Bergstrom. I've never met him face-to-face today, just texted him over the past decade. In fact, I texted him yesterday, just reminded him of this and thanked him for this. Almost a decade ago, he calls me. He goes, hey, my name is Blake. I'm from Nashville. We've never met, but I hear your son is about to have craniosynostosis surgery. I said, yeah, he is. He says, I know what you're going through. I go, no, you do. He goes, I do. He said, my daughter had it at that time about 7 or 8 years ago. He goes, I've been exactly where you're at. He goes, are you feeling this? I said, yeah. He goes, you're probably worried about this. And I go, yeah. And he starts going through a list of emotions that only a dad who's been through this could relate. And he goes, here's what you're going to feel the day of the surgery and afterwards. And he goes, man, I'm a text, a phone call away if ever I can help. And it just meant more to me, man, than anything at that moment in time. And so after going through all this, the thing that God renewed in my life and in Brianna's life is we wanted to be able to now help others that have gone through this. And so now we can spot a baby in a helmet a mile away. And so we loved going up and going, hey, tell us about the helmet and, craniosynostosis, and yeah, we can relate. And so now there's a renewedness of going, man, we didn't just walk through this just to walk through it. Now we've walked through going, man, how can we help others? So God is working. And it might be 3 months, it might be 3 years, it might be 3 decades, but he is working. And so it's your job, my job to go, Lord, open my eyes and let me see your hand in it all. Are you trying to force it? Are you seeing God work in your life? And here's the third and final question. What is God's bigger plan in all of this? What is God's bigger plan in all of this? Look at verse 5. David writes, O Lord my God, you perform many wonders for us. Your plans for us are too numerous to list. You have no equal. If I tried to recite all your wonderful deeds, I would never come to the end of them. And David, as he's writing this, he's pretty much like blown away, going, I cannot believe all that God has done. As you're in that period of waiting, that season of waiting, simply ask, what is God's bigger plan in all this? And I'll give you a hint. It's bigger than you think. And it's broader than you think. And it impacts more people than you think. But it's a great exercise to go, you know what, Lord, I just want to see even just a glimpse of your bigger plan for all of this. Lord, I'm going through the season of waiting, of uncertainty, of impatience, and I'm frustrated because it doesn't seem like it's ever going to come to an end. Lord, I just need a glimpse of your bigger plan than this. And David goes, man, his plans are too numerous and too big to see. But all too often, we get so myopically focused on waiting that we miss what God is trying to do. We get so focused on the situation, going, I want to force the situation. I don't know why it's not working. I want it to happen now, yesterday. And God's going, man, if you would just trust me, if you would just zoom out just a little bit, you may not be able to see the full scope, but man, it is bigger than you think. It impacts not just you, but your friends and your neighbors and your coworkers and your church and the random people that see you, because they're watching how you wait. And they're watching how you trust me, and they're watching how you follow me. And so it's way bigger than your situation. And I know you're impatient for this situation, but my plan is bigger than you can imagine. And so what is God's bigger plan in all of this? It's bigger than you think, and it is probably bigger than you can fully see the scope of. But just go, Lord, just open my eyes, and let me just take the blinders off a little bit and just see your bigger plan in it all. We get so focused on here, I want it now, I want it today, and God's going, wait patiently, know that I'm working, and know that my plan is way bigger than this situation. Last fall, all of our kids' birthdays are pretty close together. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law flew in. So it's Brianna's brother and his wife, they flew in last fall, and they are the fun aunt and uncle for my kids. And so when they come in, it's a party. So they flew in, it was the kids' birthdays, and my brother-in-law, Derek, for the birthday, he got the kids a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that did not have any square edges. It was like an eagle, and so it had like the wings out like that. It was impossible. I was like, dude, he's like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I was like, you don't have kids, okay. So this is going to last not very long. And he's like, no, it's going to be great. And so we all sit down at the dining room table, dump all the pieces out and everything. And I'm going, this is impossible. And so we worked on it for a good 20 or 30 minutes. And then the kids get bored and we kind of leave. But there were two people there. It was Brianna and her brother. And they were dead set. And they worked all day on this puzzle. And about every half hour to an hour, you would just hear this. Ah! Going there, everything okay? Oh, yeah, I've just been staring at this piece too long. My brain hurts. Oh, okay, take it easy. About another hour. What? Oh, it's another piece. I've just been staring at it too long. My brain hurts. And so they stayed for 2-3 days. The puzzle was not even like a third of the way complete. I'm going, are you sure you want to do this? And Brianna, man, when she gets her mindset on something, like, just look out. And so I was like, all right, we'll see you whenever you emerge from the puzzle. And so a week went by. She finally finished this 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and it was a masterpiece. I was like, this is awesome. Can we put it back in the box now? But instead of focusing on that one page, every now and then she'd have to zoom out and look at the box and going, okay, this is where it goes. If you've ever done a puzzle, you know what I'm talking about. You get so focused on where does this piece go? At times you got to look back and go, let me look at the box and go, oh, here's how it fits into the broader scope of things. Your situation that you're waiting on, I know it seems massive and I know it seems like it takes forever. But you got to understand there's a God of the universe that holds all things together, that all things work by him, for him, and through him. And your situation waiting on is a part of his bigger plan. Just going, God, take the blinders off and let me just see a small scope of the bigger plan. Are you forcing it? Are you opening your eyes to seeing God working in and through you? Are you aware that there's a bigger plan than your situation? Now, here's what's interesting. That God's plan is so big, you probably cannot see the full scope of it, because it was the same for David. As David is writing all of Psalm 40, he's writing about waiting patiently, and he's writing about God's rescuing him and setting his feet on solid ground and reassuring him, and a new song and these plans. And he just begins to write. But what David wouldn't know is that 1,000 years later, after he would write Psalm 40, 1,000 years later, the writer of Hebrews would reference David's writing 1,000 years earlier in reference to Jesus. And so you see, Psalm 40 is a foreshadowing of Jesus Christ. And there's a mirror picture from Psalm 40 to Hebrews chapter 10. And let me show you, I'll put both verses up on the screen next to each other. So this is David on the left writing this. You take no delight in sacrifices or offerings. Now that you made me listen, I finally understand. You don't require burnt offerings or sin offerings. Then I said, look, I have come as it is written about me in the scriptures. I take joy in doing your will, my God, for your instructions are written in my heart. That's David. That little line in the middle represents 1,000 years. Then the writer of Hebrews talks about Jesus, verse 5. This is why when Christ came into the world, he said to God, you did not want animal sacrifices or sin offerings, but you've given me a body to offer. You were not pleased with burnt offerings or other offerings for sin. Then I said, look, I've come to do your will, O God, as it is written about me in the scriptures. And the writer of Hebrews is telling about how Jesus came and ushered in something called the New Covenant, but would reference 1,000 years earlier David's writings. So David is writing. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he heard me, and he rescued me, and he set my feet on solid ground. His plans are amazing. And then he talks about the sacrifices, and he just keeps writing. He lives and he dies, and then 1,000 years later, the writer of Hebrews goes, let me tell you how this talks about Jesus. I get that you're waiting. I get that you're impatient like most of us are. I get this is a situation that seems like it will never end, but my hope for you is that you would allow God to flow in through your life and not force it. You would see his hand in your life, and as he's working to rescue and reassure you and renew you, that you would understand that it is part of a bigger picture of God's plan for your life. Let me pray for us. With every head bowed and every eye closed, let me just ask this question. Nobody's looking around. I just want to ask it as your friend, as your pastor. Is that if you are in a season of waiting right now, that I can pray for you specifically right here now. I just want you to raise your hand up in the air just so I can see. Man, that I can pray for you. My goodness, hands all over. All right, you can put them down. Lord, I pray for the people that raise their hand. Lord, I don't know their situation, but I can relate to impatience. So Lord, I pray for them as their friend and as their pastor, God, that you would speak in their heart right here, right now. Lord, my prayer is that they would not force it, that they would allow the flow of God to work through their life. Lord, my prayer is that today, specifically today, God, that somehow, some way, you would make known to them that you are working. That you'd reassure them, God, that you would show them how you've rescued them from another situation. God, you would renew their heart and their soul and their passion. And God, my prayer is that you would make known to them just a small glimpse of your bigger plan. Of the people that they're impacting, the people that are watching them, the larger impact that they're making because they're patiently waiting for you. God, go before them. I pray for them. Pray today, God, that you would instill joy and hope and ultimately a peace that passes all understanding. God, I pray for them just as their friend and as their pastor. Jesus, I thank you for who you are. Thank you for being here today. Thank you that your presence is felt here today. We ask all these things in your name. Amen.